It's Monday. Oh, for me it's It depends on your lab. It's either Monday or Wednesday. For me it's Monday. He said you can come to either one. So if you were told Wednesday, then yeah, Wednesday.
So let's see. God, so what finally happened in you guys' labs about the lab? Notes, cool. Yeah. Okay. I saw that someone had written a note. I mean, to her to find out, and so notes. Like any notes you want. Any notes. Cool. That's great. So how was it? How was it? It was good. Yeah.
It was easy. I didn't need the notes.
Okay. The phrases, everything's great. That's good.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where, yeah.
And mine isn't that bad either. It covers a lot of stuff, but I haven't cheat sheets.
Well, we went through the yesterday, your review, and then I had them once we had trouble with it, emailed me, and I'm gonna make sure that those questions get asked for the video. We're working together now.
Yes, I think it's great. Final exam. Officially for this class is Monday, which is the 12th, right?
Mm-hmm.
What day is today?
You can take it Wednesday if you want. Oh, so then they would have designated you for the second one.
Oh, really?
250 or whatever.
So remember, she said you can use the kitchen notes too.
No. Did you just get my Facebook views so they could use like.
Whatever. Yeah, she caved. She was rather upset about it, but.
Awesome.
Oh, that's horrible.
So open. It was totally open notes. That's right. Totally open.
Not for me, but yes, for everybody else.
Yeah.
I have this strange character that doesn't allow me to do things like that.
Who's in the Tuesday one? Is it like a good question straight out?
Yeah, like I was just saying, I put up a video that has basically every answer to the quiz. So. No, I'm actually missing 2 of the tests. And at this, are you in the Thursday lab? You can use whatever you want. She kind of got mad about the whole notes thing.
This is the last lecture of the semester. I mean, my God, how long has it been? Months and months and years and decades. But we're here. So what we're doing is diversity of life animals. Okay, I mean, this is the last lecture. And the idea is I'm going to go through a bunch of different phyla, or actually large groupings, just to give you some examples of different the different kinds of animals that are out there. You're familiar with many of them.
Bless
You're
you.
not familiar with some of them probably, but or at least you're familiar with parts of them. I'm not familiar with all of them. None of us is. But, remember on the announcement I put on my CR
Yes, thank you.
about the how's that about
Thank you
about
for
the
that.
topics.
Mhm.
Those are the main topics, and those are the things. I mean, I really am trying to shorten your study thing down to certain things. What I put on that main topics, remember, there's only 85 to 90% of the exam. It's still the majority of it.
Mhm.
So do look at other things too, other than those, but concentrate on those. And the one part that I put on there about animals, do you remember the part I put? Has to do with the three types of mammals. So
Yeah.
that's what we're going to talk about at the very end of today's lecture. Because I think it's fascinating. I think those are really interesting comparison. Because we're mammals. We all think that all mammals are like us, and of course they're not. But we'll get to that. So, any questions before we start? There is the test officially is Monday for this lecture section, but since I have that other lecture section and theirs is on Wednesday, I said you could come on Wednesday. I'd prefer you to go to this one just because it'll be kind of crowded on Wednesday if you will.
I'll be here Monday.
Class is 3 lab sections, and this class is 2 lab sections. There's quite a few people, so it'll really get crowded. But I am giving you the alternative. I said I would, so that's okay. Question? Go
Do
ahead.
we have to tell you ahead of time for coming?
No. Just as long as you take the exam, that's all it counts. Just take the exam. I don't care what time you take it, as long as you take it. And I want you to do well. Oh, the other thing is, if you want the exam in the testing center, tell me. Just at the end of the lecture, they tell me just to make sure that I have it over there for you. So I'll just put this up here. Tell me if you want. Take the test. Most of you I know who want to I know already, but just to remind me, tell me if you want to take the exam. You test the exam. Okay. So let me just say a few things in general about animals. And as I said once before to you, if I sent you to the zoo to recognize, I said a hippopotamus or a giraffe or a rhinoceros, you'd be pretty good at it. They all look different. There's a lot of diversity in the animals. They all pretty much metabolize the same way. Remember that. Same thing for plants. I mean, there are some variations here and there, but eukaryotic cells pretty much metabolize same ways, but the multicellular organisms, the plants and animals, there's such a diversity in their appearance, the morphology. There's a huge diversity in their lifestyle and all that. So it's kind of neat how when you consider how diverse all these organisms are, and keep in mind that most of this was in the last 600 million years, which is a relatively short time. I know 600 million. Those kinds of numbers, as I said before, it's difficult to imagine that. I mean, I'm not quite that old, so I can't imagine 600 million years. I can't imagine a million years. I can imagine 50 years, because I'm well beyond that. But 150 years, 200 years, these things are hard to keep in your mind. So 600 million is a long time. Geologically speaking, it's not hugely long. It's a reasonable amount of time, but it's a lot of time to get all this diversity. So there was a huge explosion of animal life, and plant life, say 600 million years ago. And what's interesting about it is that every possible niche is filled with some organism growing in it, and including bacteria. I don't want to just say animals and plants. Bacteria are everywhere. But just about any possible niche that can be filled, there's some animal or plant filling that niche, and so there's all kinds of different habitats. So I think that's kind of cool, and that's what I want to go over. First of all, when we're talking animals, they're multicellular. We know what that means. Heterotrophs. We didn't actually use these words, heterotrophs and autotrophs.
Yeah.
I should use them. Heterotroph means they need preformed carbon source.
Mhm.
In other words, we can't make our own carbohydrates, can we? Or we can't make our own amino acids. We need these things preformed in our diet. What about plants? Plants, or let's say organisms that photosynthesize
Autotrophs.
are said to be autotrophs. And that means they make their own food. They can make
Self-eating.
their own food. No, I say food. Usually we'd say sugar source or carbon source. They can make their own food from CO2 and so obviously plants need to have minerals. They need to have water, but they need to. All you have to have is CO2, right? And then they can by fixing the carbon, they can make their own energy sources. So animals need preformed things. We already know, what you need for your diet. Pretty much all animals need the same things, the same kinds of vitamins and everything else. As I said before, there are 20 amino acids. 8 of them, or 9 of them, depending on who you say, you have to have preformed. The others, if you take any one of the other 12, or any one of the other, you can convert that one to any of the other 11 or 12, or 9 or 10, I should say. But you can't convert any of those 12 non-essential ones to the 8 essential ones or 9 essential ones. So but you still need to have amino acids in your diet. Okay, you have to have amino acids in your diet. We can't just make an amino acid without having amino acid already there. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And I'm not going to ask anything about this, but what I'm trying to say to you is that of the 12 amino acids that they say those are not the essential amino acids, you still have to have those in your diet, but even if you only had half of them, 6 of them, you could convert any of the others to the 6 that you don't have. But the 8 essential amino acids, no, you've got to get those already formed in your diet, because you can't make those from something else. Whatever, that's not a big deal. I'm not going to ask that of you. I'm trying to say a few things. The other thing is, animals don't have cell walls. What about plants? Yes.
Yeah, if we had
Fungi, yes. But bacteria, yes. There's an occasional bacteria that doesn't have a cell wall. Those are unusual, but there are some. But pretty much those organisms have cell walls. But we don't have cell walls yet.
If we had cell walls, wouldn't it make it just about impossible for us to move, though?
Maybe, depending upon the nature of the cell wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, most animals move. Most animals have 2 or more tissues. I'll say a little bit about that when we get to start the examples. But so let me wait on this 2 or more tissues for a second. I'll come back with it. I'll talk about symmetry. Yeah.
Wait, you said animals are multicellular. Can
Yeah.
you define that for me?
Oh, just we're made.
Just more than one.
Yeah, there are single-celled organisms, right? But things
Bacteria.
like protozoa,
Yeah.
amoebas, they're single-celled.
But
But they're not considered an animal. They're considered protists. It's a different category.
just
So in the category of animals and plants, they're all more than one cell. Yeah, that's all. And well, actually, since we're talking about it, let's just talk about this idea of tissues. But most multicellular organisms, the cells are made up into tissues. And the simple definition I gave you guys the first lecture, I think it was. The simple definition of a tissue is 2 or more cells working together, perform some function. We're made up of 4 different tissues. Our bodies. Okay, do you remember the names of the tissues? There's epithelial. You don't have to know this. It's not going to be on the test. Epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, nervous tissue. I don't think I ever mentioned all those.
No.
It's not.
I would have remembered that.
But the idea is that when you talk about tissues, these are cells that are working in a certain way. They're responding a certain way, having a certain function. So the cells that come under the category of muscle tissue, what is their function? Contract.
Yeah.
And by contracting, they might provide movement of the organism. If it's something like the heart contracting, pushing blood around the body, epithelial tissues, a lining tissues, a covering tissue. You know, so when you talk about tissues, that means that you have some groups of cells that have some specialized tasks. You know,
And are all similar.
So things like the muscles, they're doing their contracting, but they're not sending signals throughout the body to other parts of your body. Whereas your nervous tissue, you know, it is sending signals throughout your body. That's the specialization of the nervous tissue. Does that make sense what I'm saying about tissues?
Mm-hmm.
It just means that they have some specialized function. And when we talk about the most primitive example of animals, that's the sponges. They're the ones, that's why I say most have 2 or more tissues. But the sponges don't. They're the most primitive. They don't. They're pretty much all. They're not much. Let's put it this way: the sponges are not too far removed from just a group of unicellular cells that just go out together to form a colony. And I mentioned that to you once before. Again, nothing that it's going to be on a test. I'm just trying to give you ideas to think about. But like algae, certain algae will group together in a ball, and they have flagella, and then they can move around in searching for food sources. But the fact that they're in a little ball like that, and they all have cilia, and they're all moving around, helps them to move more easily and explore new areas. Whereas if it's just they were single cells, they wouldn't be able to get around as much and maybe find food sources as easily. And actually, I called them algae, and these are actually protozoa of some kind. But anyway, the point I'm making is that those cells of that little group, a little sphere, they're really independent cells. I mean, they're just joining arms and doing something together. But if you took each one apart, they would still be fine and live separately. Yeah. So they're not forming tissues. They're not separate organisms. Whereas when we're talking about animals and these multicellular things, when they're forming tissues, hey, here's a tissue, but this tissue couldn't live outside of the organism. It's got to be part of the entire organism. It's not a separate living individual. It's part of this whole community. And actually, that's a good word to use if you're thinking of these multicellular things, like plants or animals. You can think of each organism, such as ourselves, as a community of all kinds of cells, trillions of cells, all working together in some way. But the cells are made up into these what we call tissues, and each tissue has a specific function. And each part of the tissue, then you talk about organs, it's made up of several tissues, and each part has its own separate function, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So think of it as communities, community, and everyone has their job. Yeah.
So protozoas or protists that
an individual. They're individual single cell.
Single cell. Are they're eukaryotic or prokaryotic?
Yeah, no, they're eukaryotic.
Okay.
Remember, only bacteria and the blue-greens, which are bacteria, they're only prokaryotic.
Okay.
Oh, the archaea. Sorry, I keep. In my mind, I always put them together with the bacteria, but I shouldn't because it's not real.
So archaea, are they almost always single-celled organisms? Is that what that is? Okay, cool. That helps so much.
So the bacteria, the blue-greens, everything, they're single cell. Although, if you did that experiment where we saw the little Anabina, that we got out of the water fern, they form little, like beads on a string, but still each little cell is independent. It does its own thing. They're all the same kind of cell doing the same kind of thing. But they just string together for whatever reason. Anyway, so again, when we talk about tissues, it's just you have groups of cells that are performing some specialized function, but they're part of that whole unit that we would call this animals, multicellular organism. I'll come back to examples, but let's just talk about radial symmetry and bilateral symmetry. And this is not a real big deal. I'm not going to ask on the exam necessarily, but I just want you to get the picture. We're most familiar with bilateral symmetry, but let's talk about the radial. What we used to call, we now call them sea stars. We used to call them starfish. Okay, so we used to call them starfish, but now they're called sea stars. If you took something like a starfish,
I like starfish.
They kind of have a round part like that, but then they have like an arm sticking out here and an arm sticking out here. Oh, this is a very nice picture. Oh well, I'm not trying to be a really beautiful picture. They're kind of like that. Okay, I know that's not a very good picture of a starfish.
You're not an art professor. It's okay.
No, definitely not. But if you look at the center and kind of think of it like a pie, and you were going to make pie slices, you know, if you made a slice, we could just make a slice like this. You know, that slice would be identical to this slice, which would be identical to that slice, which would be identical to that, which would be identical to that. Well, that's the same slice. But anyway, but the point is that you could divide it like pie slices, and each pie slice would be like the next pie slice. Okay, that'd be radial symmetry. So in a circle, you get sort of like pie slices. Now that's a common kind of symmetry with many organisms. The one that you're more familiar with, and I guess it's actually a little more common in the animal kingdom, is bilateral symmetry. There you have an organism like this, and if you drew a line down the center, then the right half and the left half would be like each other. They'd actually be mirror images of each other, really technical.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, that's we're that this way. We're bilaterally symmetric. If I draw one of my beautiful pictures here. So we're bilaterally symmetric because we go like that. And the right half and the left half are mostly mirror images. We're not exactly bilaterally. We're not perfectly bilaterally symmetric. I mean, we have two arms and two eyes. We don't have one nose, but then if you cut it in half, that'd be okay. But what about we cut our chest in half? You only have one heart, and it's not right in the middle. It's off to the left a little bit. So not exactly perfectly bilaterally symmetric. The lungs are more or less symmetric, although the left lung's a little smaller than the right lung. What about our intestines and all that?
Oh
We have
no.
one stomach, which is you know, exactly in the center. We have one spleen on the side. We do have two kidneys.
Kidneys, yeah.
So, but the intestines are going back and forth. So we're certainly not perfectly bilaterally symmetric, but you know, reasonably so. Another thing that's common, I didn't put the word over there, but another thing that's common with many organisms is segmentation. So, for example, if this was an earthworm, I'll do it again, make it more like an earthworm. If this was an earthworm, you'd see all these little, it's bilaterally symmetric. There's got all these little segments in it.
Like a centipede?
And or centipede or anything like that, it'd be the same thing. And if you looked at any one of these, these are called segments. So what I'm talking, if I'm using the term, I'd say this is example of segmentation. Okay. But you look at any one of these segments in an earthworm, and they're exactly like the one above it or below it, with a little exception of the head. The head's a little different, so the head end is a tiny bit different, and the tail end, I guess that's where he swoops, is a tiny bit different, but not much different. But all these other segments are pretty much identical. If you look at them, they've got the same nerve fibers in it. I mean, they look the same, but they've got the same little blood vessels coming off of the main blood vessel and everything. So, in other words, each segment is pretty much identical to the other segment. Now, look at that picture up there. That's my picture, of course. He doesn't look terribly segmented, does he? But humans are segmented.
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
No.
Not like the earthworm. Well, not that much, no. But there is segmentation. I'll give you an example.
The head, torso.
Let's take the vertebral. Let's get rid of this thing. Take the vertebral column, the vertebrae. That's a perfect example of segmentation. Okay. How about the ribs? Another example of segmentation. They're more than this, but those are examples of segmentation. And actually, if you look at the embryo of a human, you know, there's when it's slowly developing, it looks very much more segmented than the adult does, you know, or the little kid does. So it's much more segmented, but then things start to change. It's not very segmented. But we still have some, and if we look at our nerve, look at the spinal cord, we see all that segmentation too, by the way. But so we do have a lot of examples of segmentation still in the adult. It's not a big deal for my purposes. I'm just showing you these things. I think it's kind of wild. But what I want to do, just for interest, talk about some of these different kinds of organisms. I'm going to give you a list. You know, it's like a laundry list, and I'll say a little bit about a few of them. But a few I'll say a little more about just because I think it's really interesting. But I'm not going to ask you a laundry list of any of these things on an exam. And I told you what I'm going to ask on the question on animals, and I told you it had to do with the very end of the lecture on mammals. But we'll get back to that. So let's just take some examples of animals. And I'll mention the sponges just because we already talked about those. Oh, I know. I was going to give you a figure just out of interest. Of all the animals, 99% of all the animal species are invertebrate. That's kind of a lot. I'm going to put this over here. 99% of all animal species are invertebrates. Don't have a vertebral column.
So
I think I mentioned once before, beetles. God, there are so many, I don't know how many, several 100,000 different species of beetles, and I don't know what the number is now. By the way, they find new ones all the time, but whatever, there's huge numbers of species of beetles. I can't tell you why, but they're there. Go ahead with the question. Okay. So anyway, I'm sorry?
Is that what you're saying?
Vertebral means having a background.
As
Invertebrates don't have a background.
As opposed to exoskeletons or slugs or stuff like that.
Okay. So no backbone. You know,
99.
I'm stressing this is, I mean, you know about insects and all these other sorts of things, starfish and everything else. You know about these, but you know, we're much more focused, I think, on other vertebrates and other mammals specifically, because you have dogs and cats, and you eat, you know, mostly. Well, we don't necessarily only eat mammals, we eat fish and stuff too. But you know, we're focused, I think, more on mammals, and so. But I want you to realize that we're a tiny part of, in terms of numbers of species, a tiny fraction, because 99% of all species of animals, this is species of animals, of all animal species, are invertebrates. That means the vertebrates just make up a small number of species. Anyway, we'll just
wow,
some of these other species. Okay, so
it's springtime.
These are, you know, no specialized tissues. So these are considered very primitive, you know, kind of the first ones, you know, beyond like a multicellular conglomeration of independent cells. You know what I'm saying? So they are. So they have some little. Some of the sponges have some parts that are a little bit more specialized than others, or a little different from other parts, but not officially. Not official tissues. The next group, and I have some numbers every so often, so I'll put these numbers down in terms of the numbers of species of, I don't know how many numbers of species of sponges there are in the world. And again, any number I give you is just its approximation in there. Every year these numbers go up because they find more of them. The cnidarians, but these are interesting. I'm going to tell you a little bit about these. The cnidarians are things like jellyfish, sea anemones. You know, when I give you examples, just remember these are just two of so many. Anemones. Here we go. There are over 10,000 species of these. So
That kind of seems small.
Different. But here's what's the reason I want to mention these guys. These guys have, the cnidarians in general have stinging cells, and these little stinging cells are really interesting. So these all have, I think, as far as I know, they all have stinging cells. And these stinging cells are, just for your interest, you don't have to know this, are called nidinocytes, nidinocytes. But we sort of consider these as fairly primitive animals, and yet these stinging cells, these are, some people have suggested, some zoologists have suggested, these may be the most complex of all cells. These are individual cells. The idea behind them is really kind of wild. Again, I'm not asking you about this on a test, but so on the, like in the ends of the jellyfish, little
Tendrils.
things, there'll be this little cell, and it'll be kind of shaped like this, and inside is this, it's like it's a kind of a bar, this little bar thing. It's just the stinger, so I kind of do it like this. But then it's attached to all kinds of, I don't know exactly what, along with a little string, and it's actually, if something touches, there's some little sensitive things out here. If something touches that, boom! This little thing comes shooting out like this and sticks in the animal and injects a little toxin in it. But then that little string holds it to the organism so it can't get away. And then that organism, jellyfish or whatever it is, can get to it or sort of reel it in a sense. It's a complex cell, and we don't think of cnidarians in general as complex animals. We think of them as sort of primitive, and yet the cell that they have is really complex. It's pretty impressive. Anyway, whatever. This is just kind of wild. If you've gone, I remember when I was a kid, I went into the the Gulf of Mexico, warm water, God, oh God, I had these little welts on my belly. Well, it was jellyfish. There were jellyfish in the water. It stung me. Some of them are pretty poisonous. Some of them pretty potent things. You've heard of man of war. That's one of the kinds of jellyfish that's got some pretty potent toxin in their little stinging cells. So those are kind of interesting animals because of that. Okay, anyway, just for interest's sake, I don't know if the jellyfish around here, I don't know if they're particularly bad as far as hurting you with their stings.
That's the Atlantic, I think, more.
But I think the Atlantic and the Gulf, I think they're much nastier. Okay, then there are a bunch of flatworms.
Huh?
There's some interesting things about these flatworms.
That's another thing. Those cells can sting you when they're dead.
Yeah, that's true. Because they've got that little thing that you touch it, and it'll come shooting
So
out.
it reacts while it's dead. That's so weird.
Because I do remember, just speaking of that, I remember once when, I was 13 years old and we were up in Yosemite, and I had a cousin who, his only passion in the world was fishing, so we were out fishing, and then we came upon some loggers, and they had just killed a rattlesnake. And they, can I cut off the rattles? And they said, yeah, sure, if you want. The rattlesnake was dead, and my cousin got his knife out and started to cut off the rattles, and suddenly the head goes, we all jumped back. It was dead, it was dead, but still, it hadn't been dead for more than about 10 minutes, and so the nerves were still sending signals. As soon as he cut into the skin, the head came out. I don't know I'm not sure if it could have stung, bitten us at that point.
It could have bit you.
But one of the loggers just stepped on the head and let him cut it, and then it was okay. It scared the heck out of us, I can tell you. But anyway, but you're right. Those things, even if the animal is dead, if you trigger that thing, it'll
That's crazy.
The flatworms, these are the so-called platyhelminthes. The kind that these include things like planaria, tapeworms. These are nasty little guys if you've ever seen them. And so, there's some other things, tapeworms, etc. A bunch of other things. The tapeworms, we have some examples in the lab of some tapeworms that one was out of a dog or a pig, but anyway, it was over 30 feet long, and they've got, if you look at them in a microscope, they've got this mouth with these hooks on it that grab a hold of your intestine, and then it just sucks juices. So it's constantly getting its preformed, juices from whatever animals are in. And then they grow longer and longer with all these little segments, and then the segments will break off, get into the poop. And then if somebody eats the poop, then they get those segments, and then they get the tapeworm. That's how they pass. Not fun things, no one really likes these things. The planaria are really cute little guys. I'm going to tell you a little bit about these guys. They're little tiny guys, so maybe on the average, say maybe this long. You'll see them if you go to the river or into lakes. You could actually find them if you happen to scoop them up. The most common one that you'll see, a lot of experiments are done on these. They're shaped like this. You might draw a picture of it. And they've got, it's a little too wide here. It won't be quite that wide. Whatever. Anyway, but they've got two little eye spots. And actually, they're kind of dark on this side, so they look like a little bit like the cross-eyed. But they live in, as they say, lakes and streams and all that. But they're carnivorous. They eat dead animals. I don't think they eat live ones. I think they just eat dead ones. I don't think they ever attack live things, as far as I know. But what's interesting about it, in my very first zoology class, which was in 1814, a long time ago, we did an experiment where we cut these guys right down the center and then kept them alive. And it's a planarian.
Oh.
It's a planarian. And, as I said, the ones we use are about this size. Cut them right down the center, then kept them alive, and then watched them over the next couple of weeks. And each half regrew the other half that they were missing. And so you came out with two complete planaria. And I saw a picture in a book, we didn't do this, where they would cut just the head part, and then, let it repair, cut it, and they had this one little body with like 10 heads, it was just kind of weird. So it's an interesting experiment to do. If you have them as a pet, you want to give them like hamburger or something like that, because that's what they eat. They make a nice pet. And the reason why they make a nice pet is that, you can go away for a month and come back and they're okay still. And the reason they're okay is they just get smaller. They just get smaller. They just start eating some of their own internal organs and they get smaller. And as soon as you start feeding them again, they just start growing bigger again. Now, your dog or cat doesn't do that. You've got to feed them every day. They're not going to just eat their own internal organs and then get smaller and you come back and it's a puppy again. That doesn't happen.
Oh, yeah, we'd never feed them.
Those guys, okay? But these guys are, till planaria, make a good pet if you're not a very good, pet owner. Now, just for interest sake, I don't want to make any comments about why this is the case or anything else, but the first things they eat of their, if you don't feed them for a while, the first things they eat are their reproductive organs, and then because that's probably the least important if you're starving, right? Once you get healthy again, then you can go ahead and reproduce. So anyway, interesting kind of yeah, you can comment on that on your own. I'm not going to necessarily cover. But here's an interesting. I want to tell you an interesting thing that happened. God, this is back in the 1960s. Somebody, I think he was down at UCLA, did an experiment with planaria. He took a box, a T, it's a box, it was not a box, it was a little plastic tank in the form of a T, okay? So it was probably this long, it's about the size of my picture here. It's a tank of water. And what he did, he got some planaria, and he put them here, a bunch of them, say maybe 50 or something like that, put them here. Now, when planaria will just start moving around, swimming around, and, roughly half of them will go to the right side and half will go to the left side. So he said, I wonder if I can train planaria always to go to one side. So he did something. I can't remember what he did. He either put maybe a little bit of this made this side over here a little bit more acidic, or maybe had a bright light, or I'm not sure what he did. He did something that the planaria wanted to avoid. So then he put the planaria in here, and they'd all swim up here, and some would go to the right, that's fine. Some would go to the left, then they'd go to the right because they didn't like the conditions. So he kept doing that. He did it for, I don't know, maybe 30 times or something like that. And he got to the point where apparently they were really trained, and he could put them in a tank that didn't have whatever it is there. Put those trained ones in here, they'd come up and they'd all go to the right. So then he had this idea of trying this. He took all those trained planaria, and he killed them, round them up, and fed them to untrained planaria. Now this is true, but trust me, there's a problem here. But no one really knows what the problem is. He took those trained planaria, ground them up, fed them to untrained planaria, put some untrained planarian in a regular tank without anything in there. They'd come up here and they all turn to the right. They go, oh my God, there's a learning molecule. You know, if we could find that learning molecule and eat it, maybe we could learn stuff. The problem was nobody else could repeat the experiments. So at first there was all this incredible, hoopla about, whoa, my God, what a wild experiment. It was wild, except that apparently something went wrong. We don't know what. I don't think they ever really figured it out. And so now they said it's artifact, some artifact. Maybe when he took the untrained planarian that ate their brothers and sisters, maybe when he took those guys and he put them in a tank, maybe there was something residual in the tank that they didn't like. Nobody really knows what it was. And he tried to repeat the experiments, and apparently he had trouble repeating it too. So if you look it up, you can probably find this online. And I don't know I'm not sure. It was a long time ago now. We're talking 50 years ago, but I don't know that they ever found out what happened in that experiment. But now no one accepts that. But for a while they're thinking, maybe there's a learning molecule. Could we eat something's brain and we get no. It's not going to happen.
Dogs.
Yeah.
If you leave them alone with like tons of others, do they eat each other?
I don't think so. I think they only eat dead things. Things that are already dead. And
So they'll wait for one to get so small.
Don't quote me on it, but I think that's the case. But anyway, that's why I wanted to tell you a little bit about those. That's an interesting experiment, but as I said, it doesn't seem to be true. So there's no, quote, learning molecule that you could eat and then suddenly get trained. Yeah.
There was an article that cited that study, and its main focus was people with get organ transplant.
Yeah. Oh, does that what seems to happen in some? Are you talking about hearts or what are any others?
Yeah. That's
actually the girl who was the donor was killed by somebody.
Right.
And the person who got the heart, she kept getting these recurrent memories.
I certainly want to see some of that, whether it's just
Online.
yeah, I know. And that's the thing. There may be something to it, or there could be, could be
that kills it. Yeah.
That's the only problem with these anecdotal sorts of things is there may be some truth to it. There may be a lot of exaggeration. She may have had some dream or something, and then they just kind of blew it out.
Yeah.
So, but it's kind of wild. It's a wild idea.
And did she know that where her heart came from? Because that might have triggered some things.
But anyway, anyway, okay. Flatworms. Those are flatworms. There's another kind of worm. There's a nematodes. I'm going to make sure I get through the stuff I want to get through, but I like this. It's all interesting stuff. The nematodes, there are at least 28,000 species of nematodes. These are roundworms. And most of these are parasitic. In fact, if you treat your dogs for worms, mostly you're treating for some kind of nematode. Oh, parasitic.
Are you sure most of them are parasitic? Because I thought it was only 10%.
No. I think of the nematodes are mostly parasitic. of the other kinds of worms that we're going to talk about, like the earthworm types, those I think the annelids, those are mostly non-parasitic. Are you thinking annelids or are you thinking nematodes? Because I could be wrong. I'm not an expert on this, but I think most nematodes are. But anyway, there are a lot. Let's just say there are a lot of nematodes that are, because they're not most, but a lot of them are. And there are all kinds of these things, heartworms and liverworm, liver flukes and all. I don't know. There are all kinds of these things.
Nematodes are all over the place, though.
As I said, if you take your dogs or cats in and be treated, they're partly they're treating for things like nematodes. Okay, let's do arthropods. This is a really interesting group. I know. Never mind. Arthropods. These are so extensive. 85% of all known animal species are arthropods. Now remember, already I said that 99% of all animal species are invertebrates. Now I'm saying that, hey, majority of these are arthropods. So now remember, the species, we're talking species, but this is like 85% of all animal species.
Does that mean that
Arthro. No, it's supposed to be arthropods. Yeah. Yeah, arthropods. Pods. Sorry.
Arthropods, yeah.
Sorry.
So arth means bone, right?
Joint.
Joint? Oh,
Yes.
it's okay. Okay.
And the pod is referring to foot, in this case. The jointed or leg. Joint, what it really basically means is jointed legs. Oops. Yeah. Thank you for catching me on that. Not arthropods, but arthropods. Yes. 85% of all animal species are arthropods, and the majority of these are insects. Well, I don't know if they're the majority. I think it's certainly a very large proportion, and it might be the majority of these. And let's say the largest portion are insects. So, just huge numbers of these things. I'll tell you a little bit about some of these arthropods just because they're interesting, and you know a lot of them. But these guys, they have a segmented body, usually like a head, the thorax, and an abdomen. And then they have these jointed legs. And then they usually have a, tough outer exoskeleton. Usually chitinous is made of this chitinous material. Chitin, is polysaccharide. It can come in very hard forms, as you've noticed in things like crab shells and things like that. But these have a chitinous kind of, they all have some kind of chitinous exoskeleton to give them the toughness on the outside. One grouping, they're all dead now, they're all extinct, but the trilobites. Now, I love the trilobites. You can get books of just all these different pictures of trilobites that they found all over the world. And, as I said, they've been extinct for probably millions of years.
They were a dominant form of life.
They were really dominant sometimes. And the best description of what a you see them, they've got all these little
horseshoe crab
things. The horseshoe crab seems to be really old species. It's kind of really ancient. And we'll come back to the horseshoe crabs in a second, but they're a really ancient example of arthropods. But the trilobites were kind of like, the pill bugs that we see all over the place today. Yeah. Kind of think of trilobites like the olden days pill bugs, or the pill bugs of the modern day. I mean, they're not the same animal. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying the same animal, but just in terms of how they're all over the place, and they're kind of wild. But then, of course, we say insects, and then another grouping, separate grouping from, but these are all arthropods. Millipedes and centipedes. And millipedes can have, there are millipedes with just as few as like 10 legs. There are some that go up to like 750 pairs of legs. I mean, it's an incredible number of legs. Can you imagine trying to keep track of all these? Or how about trying to buy shoes for your kid? No, that's not. Buying shoes for millipedes. But anyway. Then, of course, another grouping under here are the crustaceans, and these are the crabs, crabs and things like marbles and pill bugs, those kinds of things. And then the other grouping, which is separate from insects, and I think most of you realize that, are the arachnids, spiders. Now people know the word arachnid now because it's, what was that movie, Arachnophobia, was it? I didn't see the movie.
Oh, that was in the 80s. These guys don't know about that. Yeah.
But arachnophobia, that was a big thing. I never saw the movie, but I don't know about you guys, but actually I do find spiders, big spiders can be rather imposing and scary.
I just know it from the story of Arachne.
Well, the story where the word arachnid, the word for spiders, where it comes from, was that there was in ancient Greece this woman named Arachne, who was this fantastic
weaver.
She could weave these beautiful tapestries, and she even claimed that she could weave tapestries better than the
goddess
and
Athena.
One particular goddess who was supposed to be the ultimate, that was
Athena.
Yeah, it was Athena. Yeah, and so first of all, if a human ever claimed to be as good as a god or a goddess, that was very bad in ancient Greece, and usually the gods would punish you. It's called hubris. You'll see that term every so often. This is hubris, and that was an ancient Greek, classical Greek word meaning this overweening pride. And basically, you're saying you're as good or better than the gods, and the gods did not like you doing that. So Arachne made the mistake of saying that she could weave tapestries better than God. And so Athena said, okay, we're going to have a contest. And so they both were weaving. And, to be honest, Arachne was weaving a beautiful tapestry. And maybe is almost as good as Athena's. But she made the big, bad mistake of, in her picture on the tapestry, she put pictures of all the bad things that the gods had done, the naughty things they had done over the millennia, raping women and taking them off, all these sorts of things. And so then Athena said she had to be punished, so she turned her into a spider so she could weave forever. And so that's where we get the name Arachnids from. This Arachne.
And that's how I figured out there's no God. In fourth grade, I was like, this is the kind of stories they make up. Neat.
It's a great story.
Anyway,
in the category of arachnids, I mean the same group. They're called Chelicerata. They're arachnid scorpions, horseshoe crabs. Those horseshoe crabs, I said, are really old forms of. They've been around for millions of years. Okay, then insects. Okay, then I mentioned all that. Okay, next group. Let's go to another grouping here. There's so many fascinating animals and plants. It's just incredible. It's easy to just to concentrate on one and just become an expert on one because it's fun. Then, okay, the next grouping, these are phyla, really, are these mollusks. And there are maybe 75,000 species of mollusks. They make up, these are approximations about, say, if they figure these make up about 23% of all marine animals. So these are very common in the oceans. These are things like chitons, bivalves. I'm familiar with bivalves.
Does chitin just mean like exoskeleton?
Well, no, but there's a group of organisms called chitons, and they're, in a sense, they're kind of like the trilobites, But they're different from trilobites, but they're sort of like it. But they're made of chitin,
They have the hard shell.
Yeah, but they're actually called chitons. I don't know a whole lot about them, but they're I don't know what size they are, but I'm not sure.
They're microevolution evolving themselves out of existence.
They may be, yeah, they may be. But the bivalves are things like clams, oysters, mussels. Okay, and then there are other groups under the mollusks, gastropods. And these are things you're familiar with a lot around here, snails and slugs. Look at the word gastropod. Gastro refers to stomach.
Digest, yeah.
Pod means foot. But they've got this, they go around on this foot and they can digest things and take it in. So, but they move around.
Brachiopods under bivalve.
No. I'm sorry. These are all separate groups under mollusks.
No, I know, but are brachiopods part of
Oh, brachiopods, are they
a part of the bivalve?
I don't remember, to be honest. I can't tell you. I don't know. Give me an example of one. Do you remember one?
No.
I can't.
They're whatever is non-symmetrical.
What did you say?
They have like the non-symmetrical hinge action.
Okay, yeah, I can't remember. I mean, I know the word, but I don't really remember any organisms. Okay. Anyway, just the other group that you're familiar with again, these are the cephalopods. These are the octopus, squid. So these are kind of neat. So the octopus is a fairly smart animal. They can train them and all this thing. What was the thing it was during the Olympics where they were trying to use that one octopus to guess who's going to win all the what was it?
World Cup.
Yeah. Was it the World Cup? Okay, World Cup
Every
in
World
soccer.
Cup they got a new animal.
Yeah. So they had and wasn't that octopus? Didn't you guess everyone correctly? Now that's pure chance. He didn't really have any knowledge of what's going to happen. Pure chance, but it was pretty clever. He did it. Yeah.
Except the final. Yeah.
Oh, did he miss the
Yeah.
finals? Oh, darn. The big time now.
Yeah.
Lost a lot of people's money.
Well, that was what I was just about to say. It sounds like a perfect setup. Sucker born every minute.
Yeah, question.
That's P.T. Barnum.
Kayak.
Yeah.
Grow those like sea monkeys.
Oh.
They're like sea monkeys, but they're a different organism.
But aren't
I wonder what they are.
Yeah.
I thought they were all brine shrimp.
Yeah. Are they kind of brine shrimp?
Yeah, sea monkeys are brine
Yeah,
shrimp.
But they're not. Well, they're sea monkeys that are little brine shrimp.
Right.
that feed your
But
fish.
these are big.
But these are big. They're probably a couple. They can get to be a couple of inches, and they're wide and ugly. And my kids love them, and they freak me out.
But they love them to look at, or they don't eat them, right?
No, they don't eat them.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure about those guys.
You know.
Anyway, you can look it up online. They'll tell you. See if they have memories of their past existence. Oh no, that was something different. Sorry, I'm just kidding. You never know what you're talking about. Okay, so here's another group up here. Look at some more worms. They're annelids. These are worms again. These are the segmented worms.
So this isn't part of the mollusk.
No. These are all separate categories. Yeah, and I'm just giving you a few examples in between of what fits under there. Not from memory. I don't want you to memorize any of this stuff. I don't have it all memorized myself. I did when I took zoology, but God, that's been a long time ago. But that's why I'm only telling you a few kind of interesting things about it. But these are segmented worms are examples of the earthworms that we're very familiar with. And ones that we're not so familiar with usually around here, I'm glad, are leeches. But leeches. There's that famous movie.
Stand by me.
It was African Queen with Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn.
Oh, that.
And it's a really famous movie. And they were such a good couple in movies, and of course he gets into the water to help push this boat to try to get it to safety. And of course he gets out and he's just covered with leeches and he hates leeches. It had to be leeches, and she's taking one. But they've made, they've used that in a lot of different movies after that, copying it, but I don't think in a bad way. I think, kind of honoring it, but using it in different things for leeches. Say it again?
Like in Stand By Me,
What happened?
they get like a pond or something.
Yeah.
And they all get in the water, and then like one of the kids.
Oh, but he's kidding, isn't he?
No.
No, they all get covered in
He checks the underwear and he goes into like front and he like pulls out.
and then faints.
It's like yeah.
But what in Indiana Jones, when he
Oh yeah, why'd it have to be snakes?
It had to be snakes. And
Yeah.
It's all in honor, I think, of that famous scene from African Queen. By the way, the African Queen has the happy Hollywood ending in the novel. They die, but made a good Hollywood ending out of it. But the interesting thing about leeches, they attach onto something and then they'll just suck the blood. Well, in recent years, actually more than 30 or 40 years, they've been using leeches. Well, they extract the substance from the leech. It's called Hirudina. Hirudina, I think, is the genus, and they think it's the drug they call Hirudin or something like that. But it's an anticoagulant, and so they can use it as
It's a blood
anticoagulant
thinner.
therapy. And now they're actually using live leeches for certain kinds of things where there's a lot of bleeding, and like you have a black eye, they can put it on there and let it take some of the blood out. Now these aren't leeches; they just pull out of a pond. Or a river or something. These are obviously grown,
Covered in bacteria, yeah.
But anyway, so it's just leeches. They may have used it for blood letting. They probably did. Yeah.
Yeah, there are scavenging leeches too.
Oh, right, they probably are. You scavenging meaning eating stuff off the ground, off the bottom of the river. Yeah, I'm sure there are. I mean, I don't have a number here, but there, there's many different species of these things. Okay, another one that you're familiar with are the echinoderms.
That is not a pet.
Echinoderms include the sea stars and the sea urchins. Now, again, sea stars is what we used to call starfish, but now they call them sea stars. Sea stars, sea urchins. When the sea stars can eat oysters and some other bivalves, and so if you're raising oysters, you don't want them in your oyster bed. In the old days, sometimes the oyster farmers would find these sea stars, starfish or whatever, and they'd rip them apart and throw them back in. But each part could regrow into the whole animal again. So that was a foolish thing to do, as it turns out. You want to get rid of them, not just because you can't just rip them apart. Not like humans. By the way, the word echinoderm means, you see the word derm, which
Derm
is
is
skin.
yeah.
It means spring skin. And I think the idea there, I'm not positive why they named it, but I think it's because if you touch it, it's not hard the way the chitinous outer coverings are. That's hard. Whereas this has a little, not as much as our skin, but there's a little more springiness to it. I think that's why they call it that. Not absolutely positive. Okay, now the next group are the chordates. We're going to talk about chordates. Now, what they're talking about here is not the vertebral column. We're talking about a thing called a notochord. And we're under this category, chordates, okay? But all these chordates have this sort of a semi-solid nerve cord early on. We have it early on in embryonic development. It doesn't stay in our development. It ends up, where it ends up, by the way, in us is in the discs between each of our vertebrae. That's all. It only remains of the cord, that notochord that we have. But anyway, the point is that the phylum is called Chordata, the chordates. Most of those organisms are vertebrates, but there's at least one non-vertebrate or invertebrate group that fits under the chordates, but not a vertebrate. Okay, and these are the what are they called? They're called I can't remember. I'm blanking on the name right now. Lancets, tunicates. I never studied them. I don't know much about them, but they do have this same kind of notochord that we have as an embryo, but they don't have a vertebral column. But all the rest of them, other than those little groups, all the rest of the chordates come in under the subcategory or subphylum, to be technical, of the vertebrates, or vertebrata, if you want to be technical. So I'll just say the vast majority are vertebrates. But again, there is that one grouping that is not. So let's just talk about some of these briefly. Again, the ones I really want to just talk about for interest and to be on the test, I thought the different kinds of mammals, just because I think that's kind of wild. But let's talk about these real quickly. Just the different groups under the categories of vertebrates. So now we're talking vertebrates. But under the category of chordates. Okay, so it's a really subphylum if you want to be technical. Okay, so you're really familiar with them. There's the fishes, there are the amphibians. The reptiles, birds, and mammals. Okay. Now, the fishes and amphibians need to lay their eggs in water. They need water, so they lay their eggs in water. Whereas the reptiles and birds don't need water, so they're not dependent on water. So you can kind of think of it as okay, so it's not dependent on water for egg development. So you can kind of think of it as again, fishes, living in the sea, they're slowly kind of trying to get onto land and trying to inhabit the land. There are fishes today still alive, they're called lungfish. They have gills, and so they can breathe, underwater with gills. But they can actually come up on land and stay on the land for quite a while because they can actually take in oxygen through these, what we think of as lungs. You think of it as really a primitive lung, more like a big swim bladder, but still they can get some oxygen that way, not as efficient as a real lung. But also some of them have these front, the appendage that are modified to the extent that they can actually kind of crawl, not conveniently, but they can crawl on the land. So you kind of see kind of this transition between total involvement in water versus slowly becoming partially out of water. And then you think, hey, the amphibians, they can actually come out of water. They still have to go into water for their lay eggs and all that, but they're more out of water. Once you get to the reptiles, then hey, they don't have to be in water because they're going to lay eggs, and then the egg develops out of the water, and so they don't necessarily have to be in the water for all this stuff. And they've got the hard shell, relatively hard shell in the egg and all that. Now, they used to think that birds probably developed from reptiles, but now they don't say that anymore. They say that birds develop from certain types of dinosaurs. Not just any old dinosaur, not from Tyrannosaurus, but they develop from certain types of dinosaurs. So when if you look at where birds came from, it's different now from what they used to say.
There are arguments that not strong well supported that Tyrannosaurus were actually more common.
Oh, I know, that's true. That's very true there, but there's some. It's hard. You try to look at the morphology of the skeleton and all that. But there are these ideas that some of the dinosaurs were warm-blooded. Yeah, no, that's right. And as I say, certain ones they think developed into the birds and mammals. And birds and mammals, of course, these are homeotherms. I'll say a little bit about this because it's sort of interesting. Homeotherm, whereas these are poikilotherms. These are nice words. You don't have to know them. Kilotherms. Now, and here's the deal.
Warm blood, cold blood.
Yeah. Well, you can use the word warm-blooded and cold-blooded. Oops. It's not totally accurate, but it's okay. It's reasonable. What homeotherm means is that these animals maintain the same temperature, whereas poikilotherms, we say, they're the same temperature as their environment. And that's not really totally true. Here's the deal. Homeotherms, birds and mammals, maintain their temperature metabolically. I was just blanking on the word I was going to use. They maintain their temperature metabolically. So we have all kinds of metabolic processes. We're constantly producing heat. If we produce too much heat, we want to lose it. But if we lose too much, we can increase those metabolic processes to keep our heat temperature the same. Birds do the same thing. But don't think that reptiles, well, amphibians and fishes, if they're in the water, it's pretty hard to have a temperature too different from the water. But if you're outside the water like a reptile, I don't want you to think that a reptile necessarily has to have the same temperature as the environment. They have preferred temperatures themselves, reptiles do. But in order for them to try to get to that temperature, they have to do it behaviorally as opposed to metabolically. And so, and that's why early in the morning, if it's cold and you see a snake or a lizard, they'll be, and the sun's out, they'll try to stand in the sun to try to absorb as much of the sun to warm up. If it's too warm, they'll go underground or whatever to try to cool off so they don't get too hot. Because if they stay in the sun too long, they get too hot. They can't You can't just sweat and
Regulate
cool
their
off the
temperature.
way of say, an animal might. So trying to maintain their temperature behaviorally as opposed to metabolically. Now here's an interesting thing. This not on a test or anything. This is a fascinating thing. They do these studies of, this is not uncommon. A lot of people have done these studies on, say, lizards and snakes. They'll put them in like a long box, and what they do is they'll arrange it so that there's a gradient, a temperature gradient, cold down here up to really warm up here. And they'll have heat lamps and stuff like that, other things to keep it different temperatures. So there's a gradient of temperature. Then they can put whatever the animal is, a lizard or snake or something, in the box, and they'll move themselves, no matter where you place them, they'll move themselves around until they get to that particular temperature that they themselves prefer. Okay, so they can actually find out what temperature these animals prefer. Here's an interesting point. Certain kind of bacteria, okay, these are gram-negative bacteria. Nothing I mentioned those words to you, but nothing you're going to be tested on. But gram-negative bacteria, there's something about the cell wall of gram-negative bacteria that makes vertebrates' immune system panic. Okay, so what happens if we get infected with a gram-negative bacteria? We spike it for fever, and then various things are happening, with your immune response, and presumably you will get rid of that bug and you'll survive. Okay, but that fever response is a very important response in order for your immune system to do what it needs to do. Okay, so take a lizard, say, and put him in one of those boxes. He'll get to that preferred temperature. Inject him with gram-negative bacteria, and he will give himself a fever. He will then move up in that box to a higher temperature, and he'll stay in that until he gets rid of that bug, that gram-negative bug. And then once he's done that, he'll go back to the preferred temperature. So in other words, he will behaviorally give himself a fever. That's wild. I think that's really wild, Anyway, whatever. I think all that things are wild, but I'm a nerd. What can I say? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about mammals, because we're more familiar with mammals. And then let's talk about primates, and let's just talk about mammals. We'll just talk about mammals. So that's good. We have time. We'll talk about mammals. Here's the interesting thing. Mammals are three types. We have talked about this before, but I'm going to say a little more about it. There's three types. There are the monotremes. And this is the part I really do want you to do. There's a question on this. Monotremes, the pouched mammals.
Marsupials.
And then there are the placentals. So the monotremes are the egg layers. There are only three species of these. One's that so-called duck-billed platypus. That means flat foot. And then they've got this mouth that's kind of like not really a duck beak or anything like that, but it's kind of big and round, kind of more leathery. But they call it the duck-billed platypus. But platypus is the proper name. There's platypus and the echidna. There are two species of echidna. But the point is that they lay eggs. And before you knew about these guys, you didn't think that mammals lay eggs. You think of placentals. They're growing and developing inside the uterus, but these actually lay eggs. The little egg hatches, and then but mammal. What makes a mammal?
Mammary glands.
Mammary glands. Most have hair. Hair is another thing, but there are a few that don't, I guess, have hair. But the vast majority of mammals have hair. But mammary glands is the main thing that makes you a mammal. Okay. And even though males have rudimentary mammary glands, which I've wasted on that part, whatever. But the platypus and echidna both make milk, and the little baby hatches. And you'll read incorrectly in books that the milk they have the milk ducts in a line, and the milk will ooze out, and the baby will lap it up. But that's not actually true. the platypodes haven't actually been studied that much. Males have a part that's poisonous, so they haven't been studied that much. But it turns out, I read an article by a person who studied them, that the babies will latch on to the nipple and they will nurse just the way any good mammal does. So, but you'll still read in books, textbooks, that
They just
ooze the milk and the baby just laps it up. But that's not true. They actually nurse in the same way. Then, of course, we talked about the marsupials, the pouch mammals, and you take those. I told you this before. Take a kangaroo that's the size of a human. The baby is in the uterus. When it's born, it's about maybe this long, about this wide. It's a much easier birth. I've witnessed 3 births of my kids, and as I said before, if it was up to males to deliver, we'd have died off.
A long time ago.
A long time ago. I don't know how a female's going to do that thing in humans, and humans have the worst problem with it. Why do humans have such a huge problem? That big brain.
Yeah.
Which means big head, and so babies, human babies are born very immature, and that's what takes a long time to kind of get to the stage where they can be a little bit more not self-sufficient, but they can at least get around.
Still better than elephants.
But
2 years.
Yeah. Well, no, that's the gestation period for an elephant is about 18 months to 2 years. That's right, long gestation period. But they come out and the baby can walk around. They're big.
Yeah.
They're not little, right? But anyway, back to the pouch mammal. Then the little baby is born, and it just crawls up from the vagina. It just crawls up, gets into the pouch, goes inside, and latches onto a teat. Just starts to nurse, and then it just. Yeah, and it's an easy birth. I don't even know if the mom knows it happens. I don't know.
No, they do because they hold really still. Because if they move or jump around, their baby's gonna fall off.
That's probably true.
Because they do sometimes.
Yeah. But anyway, and there are a lot of marsupials. The interesting thing about marsupials, we have in this continent we have the possum. I think, is there another marsupial? I think in South America there's at least one other marsupial, maybe 2 others. Do you know? I don't remember.
I just know the
What are
possum.
seahorses?
Which one is it? I'm trying to remember. What is it? What did you say?
What are seahorses under?
Oh, seahorses are a little. I know. No, the seahorse is a fish. It's under the fish. Some kind of little fish.
Okay, that's what I thought it was.
Is it? No, it's not actually a real fish, is it? Anyway, I forgot what it is. But the male gets pregnant.
Yeah.
But the female deposits the fertilized eggs in a pouch of the male, and then he holds the pouch. So he just holds the baby. Or he does get pregnant, and he gets bigger. And, yeah. But anyway, say again.
It's rabbit.
He's rabid. You say he's pregnant. Yes.
Well, I mean, they're not alive.
They're developing. Yeah, developing eggs, and then once they develop, they'll come out. But anyway, back to the marsupials. So they there are all kinds of marsupials. There's just a few in this continent, and in South America, but most of them were in New Zealand and Australia, of course. But what happened apparently was there were marsupials further around, all around, both North and South America. No, I think it was just South America. I think there were a lot. And what happened apparently is that when the continents moved around and then South America joined North America, all the carnivores, the placental carnivores, from a bunch of them from North America went down to South America, killed off all those mammals. But anyway, back to these. So what about the placentals then? Dogs and cats and horses and cows and whales and everything else. All these are humans. They're all placentals. And there, we have in the uterus, this placenta, which is this organ that's partly made by the developing fetus, partly made by the mom, with a highly developed vascular supply, and then of course this little fetus is fed by all the nutrients and everything coming from the blood. Now the placenta is an amazing organ because it acts as just about every imaginable system while the baby is developing in there. It's acting as the respiratory system, digestive system, immune system, you name it. It's kind of an amazing organ. Then when the baby is born, the placenta has to be delivered also, but in most cases the baby is pretty able to get around, especially if it's a prey kind of animal like a deer or something. That the baby can run pretty fast shortly after it's born, as opposed to humans that are
Yeah.
Years and years and years and years and years. Sometimes way too many. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of people like encapsulating their placenta and doing
Doing what with it? I mean,
like drying it and then
eating it?
creating capsules. And I know it's not
Well,
it's actually
yeah. I mean, there was some local
Yeah, I've heard about that.
cookbook that had a recipe for placental stew. There are people that do it. I mean, you know, it actually, I can see why it could be very helpful because it's rich in all kinds of things.
Iron.
Most of it probably was water. I didn't know about the capsule. All right, you guys, I think we're essentially done. So most of you I should see on Monday morning. The rest of you, some of you I'll see on Wednesday.
Yep.
Study, email me. Make sure you go on my show.
All right, folks. That's it. I hope you learned a lot. Study. We'll see you next semester.